Welcome to Inside the Apple Studio, a podcast that talks with architects to learn how they use Apple products in the practice of architecture, with your host, Neal Pan. Support for Inside the Apple Studio comes from Monograph. Monograph is the cloud-based practice operations solution built for architects by architects. Learn how Monograph can help you be more productive at monograph.com. Welcome to Inside the Apple Studio. I'm excited to have an architect that received a master's in architecture from the University of Illinois in Chicago, where she also worked for two well-established modern architecture firms. She is the creator of a custom residential design firm in the Phoenix metropolitan area. Her architecture is a mixture of art and technology, with her rare combination of artistic and technical skills blending together effortlessly in her work. I'm pleased to welcome architect Joanna McBride to the show.
Thank you, Neal. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Well, I wanted to get started with what inspired you to become an architect?
That's an interesting question because I know most architects say, oh, I've wanted to be an architect my whole life, but that's not my story. I had no idea that being an architect was even an option. And so I went to an art school for my undergrad degree. And while I was there, I took some, drafting classes and interior design classes, and my professors for those courses were architects, and they suggested I go to architecture school. So then I thought, I can probably make a living better than, just like being an art, I couldn't think what I would do with an art degree. So I thought, sure, why not? I'll do it. And so that's how I got into it. And I'm so happy because I think it's the best job ever. I love it.
That's great. You mentioned that you went to school for fine arts and you went to the School of Art Institute in Chicago, studied fine arts, as we mentioned, and interior architecture. What was it like having those two majors for undergrad?
Well, actually, the Art Institute at that time, the only degree as an undergrad you could get was either a Bachelor of Fine Arts or a Bachelor of Art History. So when you get a Bachelor of Fine Arts, you can take any studio classes you want. So it was so fun because I got to take, whatever I want. I took a watercolor class, I took a photography class, I took a modeling class where we design in three dimensions. I took a video class where we made videos. I mean, I was all over the board, but I also did take some, probably the majority were interior architecture classes. So we had like design. It was kind of similar to architecture school where we took, we had design class and we had drafting and 3D and, all those kind of classes. And,
right.
So it was a lot of fun. I think it was the most fun for me because I got to investigate all the different types of art, how to produce art in all these different mediums. So it was fun.
You got a chance to explore a lot of different artistic expressions and avenues, really, right?
Correct. Yep.
Okay. Well, while you were there, you also had an opportunity to study architecture in Versailles and traveled to Europe.
Yes.
What did you learn there and what did you take from those travels and how did they influence you later in your career?
That's a great question because when you're studying architecture or design and you're learning about other countries and the way they design and other time periods and the way, the design of that time period. When you're in the country, in the building, it's obviously so much more, you get so much more out of it than if you're just looking at a picture in a book. And, because it's the whole package. I mean, you're eating their food, you're listening to their language, you're seeing everything in where it actually is, like the surroundings and everything. And so it has so much more meaning, and it it gives you an idea of that in a place, which is what architecture is. It's a place. So that to me was probably one of the most useful tools for learning about the different types of architecture. We were stationed in Versailles because there's an architecture school in the stables of the castle in Versailles.
Is that right?
And it's still there. It's still there. I went there a couple of years ago, and I saw the sign for the school. So that's where the school was, but we did venture out. So we went to Spain, we went to Germany, we went, out to different areas in France. It was, it was a great experience.
How long were you over there?
I was there for a couple of months. It was during the summer.
A summer study course.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Those are pretty intense, aren't they?
Yeah. It was a lot of work, but it was fun, because we kept a journal and, would sketch in our journal and write about each place that we went to. So yeah, those are just, it's great to have that. Like I have that journal as a memory of that trip and my thoughts and stuff.
Now, did you do this before you graduated, like the year before, and then came back and finished your last year?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that's fairly common. I see a lot of people tend to do that, spend that year abroad before their last year. Mm-hmm. So after you graduated there, you went on to go get a master's in architecture. What inspired you to do that based on your undergraduate degree?
Like I said, it was my professors the professors that I had were architects, and they suggested I go to architecture school. So I decided to do that. And the reason I wanted to go to school in Chicago, I went to an architecture school in Chicago, and that was very intentional. And the reason I did that was because I didn't know any architects. So besides my professors, so I figured that once I graduated, I would have connections to get jobs.
Sure.
So that was like my goal. And I wanted to be in Chicago, in the city, learning from the best. And so that's how I ended up there, and and also one of my professors suggested I go there as well. So
was that the University of Illinois in Chicago? Was that close to home for you then?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I grew up in a suburb called Oak Park, Illinois. Well, actually, I grew up in River Forest, but it's Oak Park and River Forest is practically the same place. So
I see. Okay. Now, what was that experience like going to the university, doing architecture and getting your master's there?
Oh, it was great. I mean, because I think it was great because I was so close to home, and, just being in the surroundings that I was familiar with. And at the time, I had just gotten married. So at the time I was commuting, we lived in an apartment in Oak Park, and I would commute to and from school every day. So it worked out really well.
Wow. Okay. So you had the commuter experience for your master's then.
Yeah.
After you received your master's degree, you worked for a couple of modern architectural firms. How did you get those jobs, and what did you learn from working there?
So my very first job, I started working while I was still in the master's program. So I was still a student getting my master's, and a professor from the Art Institute, who was an architect, she referred me to that job. It was Halliburton Root was the name of the firm. It's an older established firm. And I got tremendous experience working there because everybody was super helpful. It was a great environment. Lots and lots of people worked there. I mean, it wasn't just architects. We had structural engineers and civil engineers and mechanical, plumbing, electrical. We had a marketing department, and so I got to see the whole business of architecture and worked with really great people. And then when I was as I was going to graduate from architecture school, one of my professors, so this all worked out the way I planned,
right.
One of my professors from my design class, he asked me if I wanted to go and work in his firm. And he went and spoke with the partners at Halliburton Root, and I went and worked for him. And his name was James Nagel, and his firm was Nagel Hartree. So I got to work there, and I loved that. I loved working there. I have to say it's probably one of my favorite jobs ever. They super creative, and he gave me a lot of room to be creative, which, coming from an art background, that's my strength. I wanted to be more of the designer. So yeah, so I was really lucky. I was fortunate I got to work in those two places. Mm-hmm.
So your plan worked out to get the connections to get the next job, right? Or get the job after school.
It all worked out as planned. Yep.
So when you worked there, you mentioned design. Did you do mostly design there at each of those firms?
I did, and those offices, I would say well, like Halliburton and Root, my prime role was to do, drafting, like the typical job you do when you get out of architecture school. I was the draftsman. But which was helpful because you need to learn how to do that, and you need to learn how to put sets together. And it was all commercial. It was all commercial work. And then when I went to Neal Hartrade, they did commercial as well as residential. So I was working on the residential side, and actually I did a little bit commercial. And he would let me, and I say that like he would let me because it's pretty much how it is. There was a project where we were doing the walkways in the subway, like all the different connectors to the subways, and we were designing those spaces. And he gave that to me as a project to design. So I did get to do that. The residential projects, I mostly was drawing details.
Oh, fun. Well, that's always a good place for everyone to start.
Right. And back then it was literally drawing details. We would, that was before computers. So we were drawing with, on Mylar with ink pens and yeah.
So what was that experience like?
Oh, you had to be careful because you didn't want to make too many mistakes with the ink. It was fun. I mean, for me, let me say that it was fun for me because it was drawing and I like to draw. So I enjoyed it. And also drawing details, you learn how the building gets put together,
right?
And where everything is in the assembly. So it was a great experience.
So after working there, you moved from Chicago to Arizona. Why Arizona, and what took you there?
So my parents moved out here and I followed shortly after with my family. And the thing about Arizona is, well, one, the weather is great. I love the weather here. And then also there are mountains here. And my favorite projects are hillside projects. I love designing houses on hillsides.
Interesting.
In Chicago, we don't have mountains. So it worked out because I really enjoy designing hillside homes.
Where did that love come from? If you spent all your time in Chicago and doing projects in Chicago, residential and commercial, where did the love for hillside homes come from?
Well, I didn't know that I loved it until I started doing it. And that was when I had my first job out here, was with an architect who did mostly hillside homes.
Okay. Well, that makes sense then. So what about hillside homes do you love so much? I find hillside homes kind of a challenge myself.
They are a challenge, and that's the fun. It's like a huge puzzle because there are so many variables. There's the height required, the zoning, there's building codes, there's the HOA, there are height restrictions and pool barriers and site walls, and if they can only be so tall, and there are just so many things, and you have to put it together like a big puzzle, and that's fun. That's just fun. I think it's fun.
So you started your own firm just over 8 years ago. What interested you in having your own firm, and what have been some of the challenges and rewards with that?
Well, ownership is the biggest thing. I think like having it is mine, and I have pure creative, freedom. I don't have to have somebody let me design. I do what I want, and so those are the pluses. And then the difficult things I think for me are the business side, where you have like invoicing and keeping track of expenses and all the bookkeeping thing. I mean, I have a bookkeeper and all that, but still, you still have to keep it all organized. And to me, that's not the fun part of architecture,
right?
Is that. But I do have a really great mentor that she owned the firm that I worked for right before I went on my own. And her name's Neal, and she still is a tremendous mentor. She sat down with me and went through how to run a business and gives me advice, and I can always call her and ask her any questions. So it's been great to have her.
Oh, that's wonderful. Is it just you, or how many do you have employees? How does your firm work?
I'm the president, and then I have an employee. His name is Daniel, and he's still in architecture school. He's been great. He's been with me a couple years now, and I hope he stays with me and grows with me. He's learned a lot since he started. I have some contract employees that do drafting for me, and so if I get really busy, I have more of them. If I'm not so busy, then I don't have as many. But I mean, like a rule of thumb, I have probably between 3 and 5 people.
Okay. You mentioned contract employees. Are they remote?
Yeah. In fact, I've never even met them. Like I've never even seen their faces. I wouldn't know them if I saw them walking down the street. That doesn't pose any problems. We all work remotely. Even Daniel and we're all remote, and it works out great. All of our CAD projects are on a server. We can all access them. And the great thing about the CAD program I use is that I use a Mac. Daniel, my employee, he's on a Windows computer, but we can both be in the same file at the same time working.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. Kevin, he's the main draftsman that I use, contract employee. He's on a Mac as well.
How did you find out about them?
I know that's hard, isn't it? I actually called my distributor, the guy that I purchased my CAD program from, and I asked him.
Okay.
And he referred a bunch of people to me. And then Daniel had just happened to, because I was telling him I wanted to hire somebody local who, could help me out at my projects, go to site visits and do stuff like that. And he said that just by chance, Daniel had called him and asked him to get a student version of the CAD program we use. And so he said, I don't know anything about him, but if he's looking for a student version, he must want to learn, ArchiCAD. And I thought, great, I'll call him. And that's how I got Daniel.
Were you using ArchiCAD? You mentioned ArchiCAD. Were you using that at your previous firm?
Not my most previous firm. The very first firm I came here in, when I came to Arizona, we got ArchiCAD. That architect, he loved Macs. It's all he wanted to work on was a Mac. And ArchiCAD was the program to use on a Mac. So that's how that all happened. And then the last firm, they used Revit. And I don't mean to say anything not nice about Revit, but I have to say that I do prefer ArchiCAD so much. It's so much easier to use. And there are other things about it that I really love and find beneficial.
All right. We're going to talk a little bit more about that shortly, but I wanted to touch on your teaching. So you've taught design at Arizona State University.
Right.
How did that come about?
At my previous job, somebody there had been contacted to teach, and then they couldn't. So they asked me if I wanted to teach. And I taught in Chicago. When I was in Chicago, I did teach a little bit. So I love teaching. It's a lot of fun. So that's how that happened. It was just word of mouth.
What were you teaching in Arizona?
I taught second year design studio for interior design students.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah. And the professor who normally teaches the class was on sabbatical. So they just needed someone to sit in for that.
So were you able to take his approach or his materials and then just kind of facilitate that? Or did you have to create your own curriculum?
Yeah, so I was teamed up with a tenure track professor, and she and I pretty much just created our own course.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
I mean, we based it off of ASU's requirements, but we got to, decide on what our projects were and where they were and all of that. So
how have you as a teacher taught maybe similarly or maybe have been influenced by your past experience as a student in Chicago? Have you taken any of that and brought it forward to your teaching?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, when I was teaching, I was intrigued by the students who I could tell wanted to learn. There are students who go through the motions, and there are students who genuinely want to learn. And so I would focus a lot of energy on those students. The ones who are going through the motion, I would try to inspire them with, explain to them the process or whatever, but they're harder to reach. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
When when you find the student who's really motivated, I think that's where you really can be the most use to those students.
Right.
But the process, yeah, I would say it was the same. I mean, from when I was in school, back then, teachers were in charge and students listened. Nowadays, it's a little different.
Is there more of a dialogue between the students and the teachers, you think, today?
Yeah, or like more. I felt like the students were a little more entitled. Like they felt more entitled and a little more. Just the fact that they showed up meant they could get a good grade, and that's not how it was back when I was in school. It wasn't like that at all. I mean, so like I didn't understand that mentality. It was hard to grasp, but it could have just been my class. It could have been me. I don't know.
How did you adapt to that?
I tried to, motivate them and explain to them. Like I even did a slideshow presentation of a project, taking them through schematic design and, all the different phases of a project and explain a concept, a partie, a concept idea, and how you draw from that. And so that maybe if they understood that process, they would be more engaged in their design process. And some really did. And there were a couple of students who just really went from, when I first saw their work, I thought, oh goodness, to phenomenal students, where they really stepped it up and learned and caught on.
So you did your job.
I tried.
Well, it sounds like you were successful then, at least with some students.
Yeah.
When you started your process of first going to undergrad and then eventually going to the University of Illinois in Chicago, branching out into a career in architecture, where did you think that would take you?
Well, I never really had a plan, I don't think. Like I didn't have a master plan. I just was enjoying each step of the way, kind of, and probably was able to do that because this is just meant for me. Like I was made, this was just my profession. Like it was meant for me. So I think that I didn't really have a master plan. I mean, I guess I always thought eventually someday I would have my own firm and I would design my own projects, but really didn't think a whole lot. Like I never thought, oh, I'm going to be the head of this huge firm. Like that never occurred to me. I just wanted to enjoy my work.
So how has the reality of the profession been different than you might have thought? You didn't have a plan, but did you, once you started getting exposure, especially during your master's program, how has it been different over the years than what you might have thought back then?
Some of those professors who I mentioned before, they would say to me, now remember, it's difficult and you'll never make a lot of money and you'll be working lots of hours. They told me the truth.
Sure.
And they're like, now you sure you want to do this? Are you sure this is what you want to do? So I guess I never really had any like misconceptions of what was going to happen. But yeah, I think the most like surprising thing to me was there were so few women, and it was just like walking into those big firms and seeing all those men and thinking, am I going anywhere here? Because I don't see anybody like me.
Right.
And it is a thought you have. So, other than that, although, I can't say that anyone was mean or ruthless or difficult to work with. I always enjoyed my jobs, but you do wonder sometimes if no one looks like you you wonder. So
was that intimidating?
A little, yeah, it was a little intimidating, and it just made you, like, for me, I don't like to ruffle feathers, so I kind of just nose to the grindstone, would do my work and not, try to be, I don't know. I guess you just try to fit in where you can.
Have you seen that change over the years? Like as a teacher at Arizona State, have you noticed more women in the program?
I do see more women in the program. However, I don't see more women in the offices.
Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, maybe there are more women, maybe there are, but I don't feel like, I feel like, so even if you do go to architecture school, you might not end up working in an architect's office and becoming an architect. So I wonder
Right.
like what all those women are doing as opposed to, taking the steps to become an architect.
I've definitely myself have noticed a big change, and it's been for the better in the profession as a whole. So I'm encouraged, actually.
Good.
Well, we're going to take a short break, and right after, we'll explore a little bit more about your Mac experience and experience with Apple products right after this.
Okay.
How do you manage your firm? Are you using dated and clunky software? Are you frustrated using spreadsheets and never really getting a clear view of the status of your projects? Then I'm happy you're listening, because inside the Apple Studio sponsor Monograph can help. Designed by architects for architects, Monograph allows you to track your time, your projects, and your budgets, and you can do it all in real time. They have a feature called Money Gantt, and with this awesome tool, you can immediately see whether you are under or over budget on a project, along with their new tool, Resource, which allows you to reallocate your team's time and track its impact on your remaining budget. You can easily adjust your projects on a week-to-week basis. Monograph makes this easy. So help support Inside the Apple Studio by checking out Monograph at monograph.com. Be proactive with Monograph. Well, welcome back. So, Joanna, you've taken us through your architecture journey. Now let's discuss how you started using a Mac and eventually other Apple products. How were you first exposed to the Mac?
The first job that I had out here in Phoenix, the architect that I worked for, he was all Mac. He just only wanted to work on Mac. So the first Mac that I worked on was an iMac, the G4, back in the early 2000s. That was my first. And I have to say, I've never looked back. I love them. I love them too.
So after that first experience, you fell in love. And as you mentioned earlier, they were using ArchiCAD, and you've continued to use that. And you mentioned earlier that all of your files are, say, on the server. Is that a cloud server that everyone from your team accesses? Or is that like, because I know ArchiCAD has like a BIM server product that you can use. Is that what you're using?
Yes, that's what we're on. And all my projects are on there. And like I said, like when I work with Kevin, he builds my models from the beginning. And when I work with him, we'll both be in there at the same time. And I'll say, can you move this a little over there or move this a little over there? And he's like, yep, look at it now. And then we'll just, it's collaboration. It's wonderful.
That's something that is more recent.
Mm-hmm. It is.
I don't know exactly when they introduced that feature. It's been around for a little while, but we didn't have those sort of abilities a number of years back, at least a lot when you probably started on that first iMac G4.
Right. Correct. Yeah. Yeah, but it's a great tool. And it was especially great when COVID hit because it didn't interrupt us at all.
Right. Since you were already working remotely anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, since you brought up COVID, I'm curious how you've managed your construction side of your projects over the past 18 months.
Well, it really didn't change. We wear masks, or we would wear masks and keep distance, and it didn't stop us or slow us down.
Well, that's great to hear. I think a lot of other architects have experienced something similar, at least if they're not working in a large office. That's usually been the more for the challenges that some folks have had.
Mm-hmm.
What other sort of applications or services do you use to manage how you practice architecture?
Well, I use a program called Harvest, or an app called Harvest, and that Daniel and I, we track our time on that. And some of my contract employees actually use it as well and track their time on it. So that works. And then QuickBooks Online, I use that with my bookkeeper. And then I use ArchiCAD's BIMX program, which allows me to have my clients look at the model and they can spin it around. They can just download the app for free. They can open up their model, look at it. They can go inside their houses. They can look at it from the outside. And it's just such a great tool for, because a lot of clients, they can't think in 3 dimensions like we are trained to. So it's been a great tool.
Now, is that something you send them a link to, and then they just download the app, go to that link, and then they can view their model?
Yes. And all my clients have loved it so far.
Is that a selling feature when you're first interviewing with somebody?
Oh, yeah. I always mention it. It is, because it's such a useful tool. I mean, like it's such a difference to look at a 3D model that you can spin around as opposed to just a flat elevation. You can see this building in 3 dimensions. You can double click on a door and it'll take you inside the space. It's a great tool. I can't say enough about it.
So what other sort of Apple products or services do you use?
Well, I have an iPad because that's the easiest to look at the BIMX model on. I have a laptop, and I just bought the latest iMac, the 24-inch. I love it. Yeah, I just got it.
So what color did you get?
I got silver. I have all these colors and I got silver.
Does it go with your decor better?
It does. My office is all white furniture, so, I had to stay pure.
That makes sense. And I'm glad they had that as a color, because when they had color iMacs before, they didn't really have kind of a silver or graphite sort of model. Eventually, they did come out with the snow and graphite models of the iMac, but those initial colors were very vibrant, and if it didn't go with your decor, that was a problem.
I know. I came very close to getting orange. If I was going to get a color, I would have gotten orange because that's the color for creativity. So I thought, if I get a color, but then the last minute, I was like, no, I just have to get white.
Since you brought up the new iMac, and I don't want to get too technical with you, but that's a Apple silicone device.
Yes.
And have you had any problems with ArchiCAD using the Apple silicon chip?
I wouldn't say problem, but I did have to go in and update my driver. And there were a bunch of steps I had to do.
Okay. That
kind of freaked me out a little at first, because I thought, like you did, oh my God, I can't run ArchiCAD now. But they have great technical support. They walked me through everything I needed to do, and I have had no problems, none.
Oh, that's great. And was there any sort of slowdown, or does it seem faster?
They said it's faster. I mean, I can't really tell. I don't do anything that advanced to know, if it's faster or not. I mean, I don't know.
Well, that's good, encouraging to hear, because one of the concerns I've heard from other architects is not having a Apple Silicon native application yet, and not upgrading their machines because they're concerned about that. But your experience, at least so far, has been no issues at all.
Right. And, I have to thank my ignorance for that, because that never would have occurred to me. I would have just gone, I just went and got it and just hoped it worked. And it did. So.
Well, fortunately, Apple thought about that part of the process and made it easy for you.
True.
So you mentioned earlier that you fell in love with the Mac. What's your favorite thing about using a Mac and other Apple devices?
Well, what I love is that, on my desk at work, I have my iMac, I have my laptop, and then I have my iPad. So everything's right here, and my phone, my iPhone. So, if I go to a site and take pictures and they're on my phone, all I have to do is share them with my computer. They just move right on over to my computer. It's just so easy. Everything's connected, and everything is, even the backup backs up everything. You know what I mean? It's all synced. And to me, that's just invaluable.
Yeah, that's one of the things that Apple does very well. It makes it easy to transfer information seamlessly, really, in the background between all your devices.
Right, exactly. That's my, I would say, top things that I love about Mac.
For our listeners considering maybe using a Mac in their practice, what advice would you give them?
Do it.
Do it.
Just do it. Don't think, do. They're super intuitive. I mean, I never have to, I don't know. You just never have to think. You just do. Everything's so intuitive.
Yeah.
On Mac. When I went to the last office and they were all on Windows and worked in Revit, it was like I had to think about everything, and it was all backwards of the way the Mac does things. Everything was opposite, and I had to go back, and I was so frustrated. But now I'm back on my Mac and I'm happy again. And besides Mac products, if you're a designer, they're like Apple products are just beautiful. They're well designed. They're beautiful. So it's like a no-brainer.
What other sort of apps do you use on your Mac? You mentioned that you're using the Service Harvest and QuickBooks, but do you use like Photoshop or any other sorts of apps as well?
I personally don't, but Daniel does. He uses Photoshop. I do have two Microsoft. I use like Microsoft Word and Excel and PowerPoint. I do use those,
Uh-huh.
but I mean that's it really. I don't venture out. I'm too busy. I can only do what I can do. On my iPad, I do have a fun like a rendering program where I could like take a photograph and then I can draw on it because I bought the Apple Pencil. I could draw on it and I could add whatever I want, and that's fun to play around with.
What app is that?
I don't know. You had to ask me.
That's
I can
okay.
get back to you. I can't remember the name of it.
Okay, not a problem. Joanna, I appreciate you sharing your Apple and Mac experience, but before we wrap this part up, I'd like you to share with the audience one app, utility, or service that you find most useful.
I would say it's BIMX to offer my clients that the view of their house in 3D is a great tool, and I would say probably my favorite tool to discuss with my clients and offer them.
Thank you for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's move on to our final segment, the 10 questions. The first question is, what is your favorite word?
I am going to say mom is my favorite word because I love being a mom, and I love hearing them call me mom.
What is your least favorite word?
It's a contraction, so it's technically two, but it's can't.
What turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
When I have to get into design mode, I will usually put classical music on.
And what turns you off?
Inconsiderate people.
What sound or noise do you love?
I love the sound of kids laughing and playing.
And what sound or noise do you hate?
The alarm clock in the morning.
And what's your favorite curse word?
I love the F word because it's such a release when you say it and you're angry and you say it. It's just such a good feeling to get that out of your system.
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
Well, when I was a little girl, I wanted to be a ballet dancer.
What profession would you not like to do?
I would never, or I could never be like a doctor or a mortician or anybody that opens up human bodies. Ugh, no.
If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
I would like to hear him say, "Welcome home, Joanna. Well done. Great job."
So, Joanna, I'd like to thank you again for joining me on this episode of Inside the Apple Studio. Please let our listeners know where they can find you online.
My website is tamanrosearchitecture.com. My handle on Instagram is @tamanrose. And then I also have a Facebook page you can look up called Taman Rose Architecture.
Well, thank you for joining me on this episode. Thank you.
Thank you, Neal, for having me. It's my pleasure.
I've been your host, Neal Pan, and thank you for listening to this episode of Inside the Apple Studio. I'd like to thank my guest, Joanna McBride, for joining me, and Monograph for their support. Learn more about Monograph at monograph.com. Find the show in your favorite podcast player by searching for Inside the Apple Studio, and help support the show by leaving a 5-star rating and comment in Apple Podcasts. Be sure to tell a friend about the show, and remember to follow by selecting the follow button in Apple Podcasts or in your favorite podcast app. You can find me on Twitter at NPANN or the show at Apple FORARCH. Inside the Apple Studio is a production of Apple for Architects at appleforarchitects.com.